Good morning, everyone. Thank you. It does feel very special to be able to welcome you all to the second conference day, although I see quite a few new faces and lots of smiling faces, which is great. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your contributions yesterday and hopefully today. I think we had a very productive day, if I may say so, yesterday, packed with research presentations. But today we're looking forward to making that leap from academia and to see what the science can bring to the world of policy and making that bridge, whether it's through governments, businesses, local community organizations, foundations, and much, much more. And I can't think of anyone better to kick us off today than Lord O'Donnell. Thank you for being with us today. I know it took quite a bit. Gus served as the Cabinet Secretary, which is the most senior person across all of the civil service in the United Kingdom, and he did so across 3 prime ministers, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, and David Cameron. And Gus had a hand in all the major initiatives that are so dear to all of our hearts, I think. So thank you, Gus. Gus's career combines the policy, academic, and business worlds. So again, I can't think of anyone better to kick us off on this interactive day that combines all 3. Thank you, Gus.
Thank you. So I'm delighted to be here today. Not least because I think this event, more than any other, marks the coming of age of the global wellbeing movement. And I kind of feel I've been there at the beginning, and that for me is really, really exciting. So today I want to suggest how we turn all the great ideas, and I've seen the things that were going on yesterday. I've looked at the growing number of papers around this, and basically fantastic research, fantastic ideas, but we now need to turn them into reality. We now need to turn them into real influence on policy. I think that's what today I want to concentrate on, how you turn all this into political policy development. I'm going to concentrate on the UK because that's what I know well, but actually, you can see this happening globally, and I think it always helps when you're advising a prime minister to be able to point to other countries that are doing it and doing it successfully. And I hear you had the Prime Minister of Iceland, and that's just showing you Iceland, New Zealand. I have to say the Prime Minister of New Zealand was, of course, a Cabinet Office civil servant working for me, right, where she learnt it all. Yeah, so that was great. So let me go back a little history in the UK side. And I think what explains the nature of the political problem that we face as well. So back to 2010, the indefatigable, that's a great word to use, David Halpern, came to me and said that David Cameron was interested in new ideas. And I had spoken to him in the way that cabinet secretaries in our system are allowed to when we have an election, you're allowed to go and speak to the opposition about things they want to do. And he talked about behavioural science, and he talked about setting up a nudge unit, and that was great. So we talked through that, but I was like, what about the wellbeing side of things? And it was really interesting that there was this contrast that nudging was very trendy and has become very trendy around the world. Lots of behavioural scientists, Nobel Prizes for that sort of thing. I have one of them, Nobel Prize winner in front of me, which makes me very nervous. So I was kind of keen that actually, if we're talking about behaviour change, why are you changing behaviour? And the answer is you're changing behaviour because you want to improve well-being. So if you go down the route of having a nudge unit, but you haven't thought about well-being, there's a bit of a problem. So, and then, I'm pleased to say, David Halpern said I should meet this visiting academic, a chap called Danny Kahneman. And so Danny came into the cabinet room, Cabinet Secretary's office, which is a very splendid office, I'm glad to say, which often Prime Ministers cover, and we just managed to, in good Sir Humphrey style, get a shot of them. We had a great discussion about all of these issues, and I'm really pleased that Danny is now in the life satisfaction camp, as I hear, so that's great. So the nudge unit went well, and the wellbeing stuff paused, and I'll come to that. The nudgers if you think about the kind of political problems they had to overcome, first of all, a lot of people were saying, well, you're imposing a nanny state. You know, you're trying to tell people how to live their lives. And I think of us, and I'm going to call us the Welbys, we've had to face criticisms about imposing our view of what constitutes a good life. If you think about The Good Life, that book by the Skidelsky's, saying, you know, these are the things that are important. In addition, well-being, for a number of politicians I talked to on the left, they associate it with spas and fluffy stuff, right? And trying to get them to kind of say, no, this is serious. And they say, well, yeah, but I really care about poverty. I really care about inequality. They're the buzzwords for the left. So you get these attacks of it's fluffy, it's subjective. And I was really pleased to see Andrew talking about subjective and referring to the place that we both learnt our economics at Nuffield College, Oxford, just down the road. I was very proud to be at Nuffield. I was there obviously to play football, not to learn economics, but really enjoyed the economics. But it was the whole question that I think economists found dealing with subjective stuff very difficult. And actually, I think we all now realise that feelings matter, and that possibly getting objective measures of feelings as well will be really important in winning that debate. So we had these political fears, both about nudging and about well-being. We started off the nudge unit very modestly with things that nobody could argue about. They were like raising revenue by putting in bits in letters to people that owed us tax. And basically that was to get the Treasury on board. We wanted to build support for liberal paternalism. And if you think about what we were doing at the time, this is one of the challenges I faced, was how do you put together a coalition government? We'd never done that nationally. So we had a kind of centrist Conservative Party coupled with the Liberal Democrats, so you can see how liberal paternalism would work. And in fact, we used that. And so the nudge thing politically could work with that political background. Well-being, on the other hand, actually, to my mind, requires a rather bigger vision. And it's hard for governments to come up with really good visions. You know, I remember I was in the States when Ronald Reagan as Prime Minister talked about the vision thing. Yeah, actually, or it may have been Bush, you know, I come to think of it. But I think it was Bush, yeah. The vision thing. And I think that's one of the things we need to think about really hard. And getting a vision thing on well-being with the coalition was particularly hard, as I think Joe would back up there, Joe Swinson. So what we did was concentrate on laying the foundations for a future government, if it so desired, to propound a vision based on raising the well-being of the nation. And that meant three things, right? First of all, as a good economist who knows about evidence, we had to get data. That, to my mind, was the most significant thing that we did. John was there at the launch with the ONS, where we actually got David Cameron, who, to be honest, wasn't the biggest proponent of well-being. To actually stand up there and say, the ONS, God bless them, we're going to measure the four things which we've got, and that was an enormous step forward. Large data set, not perfect by any means, but you know, when you think about we live with GDP, and my goodness, lots of things wrong with that. So really, that to me was really interesting. So once you get the data, then you need to make sure that that provides interesting insights and clear policy prescriptions. And I think the contributions to this conference show that people are now starting to use this data, and it's not just kind of the odd graph here and there. We're starting to see lots of academic papers, people in this audience. This whole conference has got really serious stuff, academic work being used, which to my mind is where the academic world should be, which is developing real insights which actually really drive policymakers and policy advisors like me to be able to say what we should do. So it's absolutely crucial. And the third step really was that what was happening to wellbeing was really important for governments and their electorates. That is, I would say, still work in progress. So in the UK, again, having done all of that, we've then made more progress on how do you operationalize it? So you've got this stuff, you think well-being is important. How does that turn into a submission to a minister on a particular project? Well, in the UK, probably the first thing I worked on in the UK Treasury was a thing called the Green Book, which is the investment appraisal guidance. I remember writing a kind of nice piece, I thought, on risk and uncertainty, which was delegated to an annex, I'm afraid. There you go. But it has been important. We've now got guidelines in the Green Book. It is the policy officials' Bible. We have the handbook for wellbeing policy making, Paul Fritters and Christian Keckel. That's done. We've got charities like State of Life thinking about how you might use this stuff. That's all working well. The point is, and this is where I want to concentrate, take up by most senior politicians remains incredibly disappointing. And I fear the current government, curiously enough, is a little distracted. And I don't expect that to change anytime soon. There is an opportunity for a new Prime Minister coming in with a new cabinet to decide that they're going to do this. I think the nature of the debate that's going to carry on in terms of the leadership battle is going to mean it's hard to get that through now. But we'll see. I haven't given up. I hope the success of other governments. You look at New Zealand, you talked about Iceland. Politicians they're very attracted to what's been popular elsewhere. They're very attracted to finding out who's getting political success. You just have to be at a G7 or a G20 conference to see them all gather around a politician who's just won an election. They are gold dust, right? And everyone wants to talk to the one who's won an election. It's just, that's what motivates them, right? So that's where we need to get. We need to really big up the work that successful governments are doing. And then we need to think about, what is this vision going to look like? How can we get something inspirational there? So, tackling poverty and inequality and creating a fair society. You've heard that from everybody. Fair, just to be clear, every kind of focus group that comes along that I've been through all the political parties will tell you the most important word to include is fair. Nobody really knows what fair means, and they all have different interpretations of fair. So, how do we manage this? And I would say, if you view it through a well-being lens, I think this translates as actually creating a society that first and foremost tackles the causes of low well-being. Andrew mentioned this in his paper. You can use various words, but some people call it misery. But thinking about a focus of policies that actually inspires voters by saying we're going to look after the least well-off groups in our society and the people who are having the most miserable existence. I think that works. I wouldn't recommend to a Prime Minister they go out there and say, right, what we're going to do is take people who are really happy and make them blissful. Not going to work, right? We do need, though, on the other hand, to think about, so those people who are in the lower to middle income groups, how do we manage for them? And I think this is going to be the challenge for that vision. And this is what kind of a challenge I put out to you, because I don't have an answer for it. How do we sort out with the cost of living crisis, which we know is going to get worse? Real incomes are going to be falling for a large part of our population, and this is going to be global, not UK specific. How do you help through that? And we know, I think a lot of the wellbeing research has shown this, it's very asymmetric. Falls in income are you really notice them as opposed to increases. And of course, increases in incomes and well-being tend to be associated, in my description, and politicians will back this up, with I've done really well, I've improved my income. If my income has fallen or my well-being has fallen, the government screwed up, right? That's the way it works. So that, I think, is really, really important. So, yeah, looking at inequalities in well-being, looking at low well-being, I think is really important. Also, I think one subject that nobody's really much focused on is well-being mobility. So there's a lot of people, particularly, again, actually you'll find this cross-party who worry about social mobility. And I'm kind of, and social mobility, as everyone will know, we've had millions of policies to try and tackle and improve social mobility, and very, very few of them have made any impact whatsoever. What about well-being mobility? How do we take people from very low to middle to upper levels? Is that likely? I mean, you know, what's the path through which we should go? So I think that's a really, really important subject to do. What do we need for all of that? Well, we need lots of data. We need some micro data. We need some research. We need people willing to fund that sort of research. I think those things are really important. In the UK, we've got a Levelling Up white paper, which establishes a mission to raise well-being throughout the UK. The interesting thing about that is Andy Haldane, who, I stress, a very good friend, with me, my support, set up a charity called Pro Bono Economics, which I hope a lot of you have heard about, which is dedicated to improving well-being by focusing on the impact of charities. Andy's chairing a group to monitor progress on the missions in the white paper. It's the kind of thing, I think, which actually will be there across the parties. I think there's some parts of that Levelling Up white paper which will work and which people can pick up. And I was very keen that Andy was there to write this stuff and put it in the white paper, and he's now outside of it again, which is smart, because it's going to be a bit of a not a great period for a while government sorts itself out. So nothing much is going to happen. But if he can put in place some metrics to govern how we're improving that well-being, that's a great opportunity for all of us. And, you know, can you imagine a government coming in and saying they're not in favour of this? I think, you know, all the main political parties have been very clear that they are behind this agenda. So I think they can all embrace the goal, whilst, as political parties have to do, differentiating their product by explaining the different ways in which they'd achieve it. And I think that's where we come in, as to giving the evidence base as to what those different ways are. And promoting the ones we think are really good. And we know, thanks to the great work by George Ward, that incumbent governments gain political support if well-being goes up and suffer if it diminishes during their time in office. That's a pretty strong incentive, actually. So we need to understand the nature and causes of the problems people face. I think there's a lot of scope to make progress from using a bottom-up approach. So if you think about local governments, they are much closer to their electorates. Regional mayors have demonstrated, I think, an empathy with their people. They become, which basically transcends party politics. I think the Be Well project in Greater Manchester, brilliant example of what can be achieved, bringing together a wide range of local groups, and their work has already identified some really interesting well-being inequalities associated with gender identity, sexual orientation and transgender status, which hadn't come out from other work. You've seen progress around the UK. Scotland's doing some interesting stuff. Wales, intergenerational work. So, you know, we can see this in the devolved, we can see it at local level, we can see it at mayors. I remember many years ago going down to a trip to meet the mayor of Bristol, who was trying to make Bristol a well-being city by wearing red trousers, which was interesting. You know, London Mayor is now incorporating well-being impacts into decision-making in our capital. So there is progress there. To facilitate all of this at the political level, there's something everybody in this room needs to do, which is quite hard. And that's, you need to let go of some things that you value a lot. And that is the language. Like I said, politicians want to use their own language. I remember, just give you one example, and Joe will know this. I remember sitting down with Nick Clegg as the leader of the Liberal Democrats coming into coalition and talking to him about something which I thought they'd really like, which was the charity sector and the whole big society approach. And Nick said, no. Big society, conservative words, no chance. And it was like, it wasn't whether it was a good policy or not, it was just no. And so you really need to understand that for some people, well-being may be the right word. For others, it may be a complete turn-off. To be honest, I'm just interested in the policies and the results we have. I don't care what language we use. People care a lot about language. Politicians care a lot about language, and they'll care about language because they've gone to their focus groups, and whether that's sensible or not. But I think we need to be prepared to let go, and we need to be prepared to get to the policies that matter. So that's where I think we need to go with the various stages of government. Private sector, I think, has a really important role here. We've seen from the work that Jan has done on the relationship between well-being and productivity. We've seen, I looked at George Ward's paper on quantifying the potential gains from thinking about well-being and the whole Indeed stuff. I think that is absolutely crucial. This is an area where I think we can make progress really rapidly. When I left government, doing various things that pay me absolutely nothing. But one thing that pays me quite well is I'm on the board of Brookfield Asset Management. We've just hired Mark Carney. Mark is an example of putting the data and formulation behind the E of ESG. So net zero is being quantified. It's really important in the commercial world because S&P is now looking at greenwashing debates and all the rest of it. You've got to get this right. It will matter enormously for investment and for what companies do. We need to translate that now into the S. The S is completely underdeveloped in ESG. So we need to have sensible measures of S. And for me, that will look at a company's social agenda, which will revolve around the well-being of its employees, customers, suppliers, and the communities in which they operate. We need to make that real. And we need to work with companies, with regulators, with investors, to see how all of that can come together. There are some examples. The construction sector actually is doing some interesting work on that. But that is a massive challenge for our movement, and I'm really keen that the wellbeing movement can actually take that on board. In addition to the public and private sectors, we should not forget the civic sector. This to me is something which never gets the amount of weight it should do. Andy Haldane and I are working on this. I'm chairing a thing called the Andrew Law Commission on Civil Society, because I remember as an economist, you talk about, you do your economics 101, you have the public sector, the private sector, and that was it, right? Curiously enough, there is a third group called, and we shouldn't call them the third group because they are really, really important, called civil society, which actually gets at the parts other things can't reach. Charities, community groups, volunteering associations, they have a massive impact on well-being at a local level. That was highlighted during the pandemic. The emergence of food banks, neighbours shopping for each other, volunteers putting vaccines in my arm. I mean, these things just arose, and that's an amazingly powerful group, and they're an amazingly powerful political group to have on your side. So I think that, to me, again, something really, really important. Foundations, they can play a critical role in this process by funding both projects and mission-oriented research, and by working out some of the ways in which we get the infrastructure of charities to be able to measure their impact in the right ways. These things are really important, and I think some of Andrew Oswald's chilling slides show how important that is, that we actually are able to tackle these real problems of very low well-being. And finally, at the individual level, we need to promulgate an understanding that it is possible to improve your well-being, and that governments, employers, and civil society stand ready to help, and for individuals to have access to that. Because we know that many of the issues on well-being relate to families, they relate to all sorts of issues like social media and things like that, and we need to make sure that we come together and that we have the policies that work on that. Sometimes there'll be legislation, mostly they won't be, I think. In my view, the best way to start is with children. Parents want their children to have fulfilling, satisfying lives. That requires the education system to move away from their endless obsession with exams. I was at a Times CEO conference the other day where Michael Gove, when he was in cabinet, was asked about the Times education. They'd done a big work of research work on education, and Michael said, no, our problem is we don't have enough exams, and the CEOs laughed, right? We just need to get across to people that what CEOs want are individuals who have resilience, who can work in teams. It's not their individual exam performance that is, there's nothing wrong with doing well in particular things, but there are far more skills that matter. So that, I think, is really important. Children, hence that's why Be Well Project, Healthy Minds, all those sorts of things, really, really important. One other, possibly more controversial point, a lot of researchers are working on modifications to GDP, right? Designed to make GDP a more accurate measure of success. That's not where I am, and I don't really understand that debate, to be perfectly honest. The subjective wellbeing movement is really about placing much more weight on individuals' own perceptions of their lives. These approaches, GDP, subjective wellbeing, are fundamentally different. Personally, I use GDP as a measure of activity, not utility. And that's where it should be in my book. So trying to kind of muck around with GDP, fine, but we need to have that argument. So where are we on the World Wellbeing Movement? Well, we've come a long way. Globally, we have the World Happiness Reports. Great to see John Halliwell here. They've done some amazing work, looked at responses to COVID around the world. I think when we do that, it's a brilliant opportunity to actually harness all of this work that everyone's been doing on issues like, did it make sense to close schools? The implications for mental health, for kids, for parents, versus transmission issues. All of these trade-offs between all of these different things. You really need a well-being metric. You need Wellbees to actually bring all of those together. So that's, I think, really important that globally we have countries that are taking this up. In the UK, we've got lots of positive things moving forward. The What Works Centre, Nancy's wonderful What Works Centre. Bringing together the evidence, that's fantastic. Here, Jan's Oxford University Wellbeing Research Centre, brilliant. Thanks for all the sponsors. I think all of the researchers that have been involved in this, that have helped us along the way. I think of going back to Easterlin, obviously Danny, Andrew, Richard Layard, who has nagged me forever on various subjects. Paul Dolan, who's inspiring people. Everyone in this room, I just want to say a big thank you to you, because you are, to my mind, what's the future? This is going to happen, right? It's like you can see the whole behavioural revolution, and now we've got economics with a fundamental change in what constitutes this place to start, as opposed to the place that Jim Murley's taught me to start, which was maximising utility subject to various budget constraints, and let's assume that all individuals are the same because it's a bit easier. That's, I think, something that we need to work on. But these people have just been brilliant. We need to build on them. We need to build on the grassroots movements, like I say, the volunteers, the charities, people at Action for Happiness, all of those things. Pro-Bono Economics, I hope is doing that. And we need to get the institutions in the right place. And big shout out to Liz McEwen and everything that ONS has done. That first thing when we started to measure the data, people were saying, we'll do this for a little bit, and then the mood will change and we'll move away from it. Actually, it's a national statistic now, so that makes it really hard to move away from it. We are, the ONS, God bless them, we're also looking at this world where can we measure the contribution of civic society, which is like, for now, I keep saying this, those people that believe in GDP, if everyone who's volunteering and helping out in charities gives that up and goes to work on prostitution or illegal drugs, then GDP goes up. How mad is that, right? It just shows you that we should not be in that world. So we need ONS to be doing this. So finally, I think our movement, as I said, is coming of age. And with adulthood comes the responsibility to leave the world a better place. I think people are increasingly understanding that actually what matters to their lives is their well-being. They're using language which is different. They're realizing that there is more to life than just money. You see it in things like, and this really annoys me, you see the debate now about the recession we're going through. And a lot of economists saying, well, it's terrible. GDP is going to fall because all these over 50s, lazy so-and-sos, have decided that they don't like commuting and they want to spend more time at home. This is terrible. You know, GDP is going to go down. I'm like, okay, run that by me again. People have themselves chosen something they prefer, and we're going to say this is bad? I mean, to use the technical term. So, I think basically my message is to politicians to wake up and embrace this radical agenda. It's there. It's, you know, it's so compelling. And it's about people's perceptions of their own lives. What could be more relevant to individuals? So I think it's there. I'm kind of like puzzled as to why they haven't picked it up, just as I'm puzzled by why all of that economics I learned about companies knowing how to maximize their profits, why they haven't sorted out the well-being stuff themselves. You know, we need to work out what's the, in that case, the market failure, what's the political failure. That means we haven't got there. That, again, is a work in progress. I can't answer that now. But believe me, for the party and the politicians that get this, the future will be theirs, and it will be a better, more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you.